Hello, and welcome to On Point. I'm Jamie Gonzaga. Big changes are always happening downtown, but this year, city leaders and developers are making more moves than ever to revamp and revitalize downtown Los Angeles. Some critics wonder what this constant construction will mean for downtown's homeless population. Drive around the neighborhood, and you can't go 5 blocks without seeing something being constructed or renovated. At the moment, there are more than 100 development projects throughout the neighborhood, 30 more projects than were under construction 3 years ago. One of the biggest advocates for the changes is Councilman Jose Huizar, who's spearheading Bringing Back Broadway, which seeks to bring back to life the historic district. The area was once home to famous theaters, but many of them now sit empty. Recently, they are starting to be converted into hotels, retail stores, and coffee shops. And it's not just restaurants bringing patrons back. It's LA Live, the Macy's complex, and the new Fig at 7th Shopping Center. Earlier this year, a Chinese investor bought a plot of land known as Metropolis for $150 million. His company has already broken ground and plans to build 4 towers, including a 38-story residential tower. There are plans for retail and entertainment spaces with a budget of $1 billion. Although these are exciting developments bringing in revenue for the city, studies estimate that at any point in time, there are more than 58,000 homeless people in Los Angeles County. 10,000 of them live in downtown. This leaves some question about whether development should turn from building lofts to low-income housing for the homeless. On Point's Judith Retana is joined by 2 guests with some insight into the downtown renaissance.
Thank you, Jamie. Today we have Jerry Neuman from Home for Good and Robert Kent, CSUN Professor of Urban Planning. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the first question is for you, Jerry. How are new projects downtown affecting the homeless?
Well, I think the gentrification of downtown is having dramatic impacts on the accessibility of where the homeless have to live, where we put them, the marketplace. If you think back, I think if you look back about 12 years before kind of the renaissance of downtown, we had approximately 70% affordability in downtown, and that number is now reduced down to about 30% affordability. So in terms of the area that's affordable to people to move into locations, and also areas that people have to develop permanent supportive housing or otherwise, it's diminishing, although it's still a fairly large number.
Okay, the next one's for you, Bob. What are the kind of factors that have to be in place for changes and redevelopment to happen in big cities like Los Angeles?
Well, you need I guess one of the critical things you need investors and developers who are willing to engage with the city, engage with the problems that the city has, and at the same time see opportunities to make a profit, because they need to make a profit in order to invest, and so I think that's one of the first things we need.
Right, and what happens to other cities around Los Angeles as downtown starts to redevelop? Do they kind of get forgotten, or what happens to them?
Are you referring, say, to something like Long Beach or Pasadena, or?
Yeah, Long Beach or Pasadena, or other smaller sections.
You know, a large city like Los Angeles will compete with other regional centers like Long Beach or Pasadena. But I think in general, what is good for downtown LA is probably going to be good for the region as well.
Okay. And Jerry, how bad is homelessness downtown compared to other neighborhoods in the city?
Well, we have about 50,000 homeless people in Los Angeles County. Approximately 10–12% of those live in downtown. So from the standpoint of countywide, it's not a large portion of the population, but certainly it's the most concentrated portion of the population. We find that at any given night you have between 1,200 people living on the street, between 700 and 1,200 people living on the street, and that's a substantial number. I mean, the rest of the 10% find shelter for the night, but you still have a large population living on the street.
And how do we get to the point where there's so many homeless people downtown living on the street?
Well, you know, it's kind of a long history in terms of how the homeless population has grown. Partly when the mental health system was more or less dismantled in the state, it turned a large population out onto the streets that had not been there before, and did not provide services for them to return to, and so they were kind of left to fend for themselves on the street. At the same time, you've had a large population of veterans returning from a variety of different wars that we've had. We've seen a reduction in the veteran population, but we're still at about 8,000 veterans that are homeless in LA County, and quite a few of them, a significant number of them, live in downtown. So when you saw that shift away from the mental health system, or the denigration of the mental health system about 30 years ago, there was this move to create services, and a lot of the services that were initially established were in what's known as Skid Row. So a lot of the homeless population kind of found themselves coming to Skid Row for the types of services and the types of income needs that they had, meaning that there were social service organizations that were providing them either a service, or there were governmental organizations providing them the money that they needed to subsist in the area. So from that perspective, you had this kind of coalescence of both housing there, of services there, and you had a population that needed both.
All right, and can you give us just some background on development downtown and kind of a little bit of history on that?
Downtown, you know, it's historically, downtown was one of the, was the first pueblo to be established as they found the river, and from that, downtown grew. In the 70s, Tom Bradley decided that as a move away from somewhat what we would call the historic core, they started building Bunker Hill, where they moved a lot of what was then single-family homes off of Bunker Hill and started creating commercial development. That kind of set a trend downward for what has become our historic core of downtown, which had been vibrant up until then through the 20s and 30s. And then as that historic core deteriorated, we started seeing shifting away, and new development opportunities really didn't come forth because the regulations and rules that govern downtown were so difficult and it mired developers to the point where it was difficult, as the professor said, making a profit. One of the early pioneers, I think, in the historic core of downtown was a gentleman by the name of Ira Yellen, who was my first client as a lawyer. And he saw the vision of taking some of these historic buildings and turning them into housing and residential buildings that were once historic office buildings. That set a trend, although what we did was we had to rewrite many rules and regulations and ordinances, and the types of entitlement that had to be gotten were very, very difficult and onerous in many ways as a process. After IRA kind of set that trend, and you saw new developers like Tom Gilmore and a few others that came in, the city made the smart move of creating an adaptive reuse ordinance that basically allowed a lot of flexibility in adapting old buildings into new residential buildings. And from that, you saw a rush to kind of create more housing downtown and create commercial development. So you've had pockets like South Park and the historic core and the Bank District and now the Arts District that have all kind of taken off and are flourishing because you have got a great infrastructure, and now you have people starting to live there, and from that you've now developed markets and the like that can serve those people.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Professor, can you kind of explain to us what gentrification is and what it does to people living in those neighborhoods?
Well, gentrification, I think, typically is a process, or most people understand it to be a process where neighborhoods which are often lower socioeconomic status, where housing stock has declined, where these neighborhoods are typically maybe adjacent to downtown areas where there's, I would say, high-end employment, but white-collar employment. And what happens typically is that people begin to see these housing areas, these areas that have declined, as attractive because they're close to the city, the reduction of transportation expenses for commuting, and also close to arts, the theaters, restaurants, and the like. And so you get developers who will go in and rehab these buildings or tear them down and build buildings, build apartments and lofts and these sorts of things for people with higher levels of income that work in the city and want to live close to the city. At the same time, of course, what happens is that many people who have been living in those buildings, paying relatively low rents, are displaced. And so part of the dialectic or discussion about gentrification on the one hand is that it's a response to market forces, people looking for housing adjacent to their jobs, and at the same time it treats other people quite quite roughly, as they're forced out, as they can't afford to pay the rents, and have to move to other neighborhoods or simply forced out of their homes.
And what does gentrification mean to you?
For me, gentrification is part of the positive trend of development that allows neighborhoods that were once downtrodden to find a new life. The question of gentrification is not, to me, so much about how does it change the dynamic of a neighborhood, because more often than not it makes it better. The question is how does it change the culture and nature of the neighborhood, which, finding that balance of kind of maintaining the culture, maintaining the types of diversity that a lot of our neighborhoods have, is really what most people see as the negative of gentrification, that more often than not it doesn't maintain that culture or those dynamics or those diversities. But I think that doesn't have to be the case. So for me, gentrification is about creating a positive turn to a neighborhood, but also utilizing it as an opportunity to marry what was once there and the diversity of those neighborhoods into something new and better.
Okay. And Professor, are there any cities that come to mind where gentrification or redevelopment has worked?
Well, I guess I would agree. I mean, I think gentrification, quote unquote, works everywhere. It has, I think, some negative consequences. I mean, in almost every major city in the country today, we see gentrification in some areas. And, some cities like Los Angeles, with the adaptive reuse ordinance that has been discussed, it is really blossomed in the last 5 years. And sort of we see a gentrification really in the downtown core, I would say. In other places, that gentrification often occurs on the margins of downtown, but it's occurring even in Rust Belt cities. Places like Cleveland have gentrification occurring as well. So it's a fairly widespread phenomenon.
And what groups of people have are stakeholders in redevelopment?
Well, people that live in the city are the stakeholders, I think, in the first instance. The city residents have a stake in redevelopment. City government has a stake in redevelopment. The commercial sector has a stake in redevelopment because almost all of these properties are owned by commercial investors or commercial developers, and so I think everyone in a city will have a stake in redevelopment.
And would you say there are winners or losers in redevelopment and gentrification?
Well, on the margins, yes, I would say there's probably some winners and losers. I think the hope is that the gentrification is a positive process overall, and that it's a natural, in some ways, a natural economic process and a natural process that occurs in cities as they change over time, and neighborhoods, become old and they become dilapidated and they need to be revitalized. So overall, I think it's positive. There are negatives that occur. Lack of diversity, maybe, economic squeeze on some people, but overall I think it's a positive.
Now, is there such thing as overdevelopment in your opinion?
Overdevelopment. I don't know. To me, overdevelopment is building a house on a lot where there's no yard. No. Sorry. No, I don't know.
I agree with that.
I don't know if I would say there's such thing as overdevelopment. I mean, is New York City overdeveloped? Probably not. It depends on where you are.
A single ember that escapes from a wildfire can travel more than a mile. You can't control where that ember will land, only what happens when it does. Get Fire Adapted now at fireadapted.org.
Now, as you're getting these big businesses coming in, you're getting LA Live and the new Fig at 7th complex and the big Macy's complex. Do you think that mom and pop shops have anything to be worried about?
For me, sure. Of course, any time when business comes in, it's I think a concern for smaller businesses. Yeah.
And do you think they have anything to be worried about?
Yeah, I think they should be concerned. I think that the reality, though, is it also has brought more people to downtown. You now have 20,000 residents living downtown that didn't live there 8 years ago. And from that perspective, those mom and pop stores, if they keep up with the market trend, have the opportunity to get patronage from people they would have never sold to before. So I think it's about finding you know, the right mix for these stores and maintaining them and incentivizing them to be there. I do think there's winners and losers in development, but it doesn't, in redevelopment or urban development, if you will. But I don't think it has to be the mom and pop shop, just as I don't think it has to be the displaced homeless person. I think it's about smart planning. I think it's about fighting against what would naturally then become NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So, because as people who have the means come and they buy better apartments or they live in nicer places, their desire not to have that permanent supportive housing facility next to them has to be kind of tempered. And the government and those of us who are, you know, progressive or want to see the diversity in these gentrified areas need to fight for the fact that that permanent supportive housing needs to be there, because the homeless person that lived on the street, it was just as much their neighborhood, if not more, than the person who just moved in. And so finding places for all these people is very important. And that's about policy. It's not about the economic realities of redevelopment or even urban development.
Okay. And who, I know you touched on it a little earlier, but who are these homeless people downtown? Where do they come from? Can you give us just a little information on them? You
know, Los Angeles is a great mecca for it. I mean, some of the numbers are startling. You have, right now we have, as I said, in LA County, about 8,000 homeless veterans. What we're told by the Veterans Administration is that in the next 2.5 years or so, we can expect that 30,000 more homeless veterans will be coming to LA County. And of those, about 10,000 of them will self-correct in about 6 months, but 20,000 homeless veterans are at risk of becoming permanently homeless on our streets in LA County, and downtown will get more than its fair share of that. They, you know, 20% of those people could end up downtown. And who are veterans? You know, they're people who graduated from school with us. They're people who have served our country from all across the country. So those are the homeless people. Homeless people are people who have had, you know, bad luck relative to their economic conditions, a job or whatever. They could be people who have been abused in some way, shape, or form. They could be people who have disabilities oftentimes, drug addictions, you know, alcohol addictions. Basically things that everyone has, but for one reason or another, by virtue of circumstance, instead of them having been able to deal with that issue or have the support system to be maintained in a house, they end up homeless, and they don't have the people to turn to.
And now that we're building all these new complexes and these new expensive lofts, where are these homeless people going?
Well, that's the tough thing. You know, we you know, as part of adaptive reuse, we're fighting to maintain facilities in and around the downtown area, but not get in the way of the you know, of the rebirth of some of these great streets like Main Street or Broadway. So it's kind of balancing it, as I said. So you know, you have opportunistic places. For instance, there's an ordinance in the city that doesn't allow what was once single-room occupancy hotels that then converted into single-room, you know, units, predominantly occupied by homeless or formerly homeless people. It doesn't allow them to go back into service as a hotel, oftentimes. So that preserves certain buildings. The problem is some of those buildings stand right in the middle of where a hotel developer would like to revitalize a neighborhood and build a new hotel. So how do you balance those two issues? What buildings should be preserved for homeless and for the homeless or formerly homeless, and what buildings should be part of the rebirth? And that is discussed on a daily basis. And we keep trying to find the opportunities where we can build better projects that are permanently supportive, that permanently support those people who are homeless, and yet not get in the way of the progress that downtown is making.
So what kind of projects are going on for people to house them, and are there?
If you look at, there's a great new project on Spring Street, I think it is, the Star Apartments. It was an amazing model of both how you do it economically with the participation of the Department of Health Services, as well as kind of a marvel of architecture in the sense that it was completely modular. They have built a great commercial element at the bottom that really serves the neighborhood and provides an opportunity for homeless people, and then it has great services for homeless or formerly homeless people within the context of the project itself. Problem is, I think it's 50 some odd units, and it was oversubscribed in minutes, you know, from the moment it opened. So we have to keep, you know, finding these places that we can develop and that are opportune. And we have great partners who are doing it, like you know, a number of the housing developers that are downtown, or the number of, you know, service providers that are downtown, and they're building great projects.
And what does Homes for Good do downtown? Well,
Homes for Good is a plan. It's a plan that was created by a venture between the United Way and the LA Chamber of Commerce, who got together and said that they understand that oftentimes social issues aren't addressed in a way that people really hear or see them, or in a way that's the most efficient or economical way. And when business lends its voice and its acumen to the social service or the social advocacy community, that combination creates an opportunity for a plan that can be really, you know, changing of the environment in very, very great ways. So Home for Good was born out of that concept, and that is the plan of the Business Leaders Task Force on Homelessness. And now the Business Leaders Task Force on Homelessness, or Home for Good, has kind of created an umbrella advocacy organization that works with a number of partners to kind of do system change, to kind of change the way that the county looks at homelessness, the way that we treat homeless people, the way that we bring people from the streets to homes, and kind of cut through a lot of the inefficiencies, both in the funding side and in the actual service provision side, and create a whole new policy for how people that are homeless can get into homes more quickly. And from that perspective, that policy or advocacy perspective, all the great service providers that have always been in Los Angeles now have an opportunity of a renewed system that they can function much better under.
And what other resources do homeless people have?
There's a variety of resources that they often have. There's federal vouchers, there's state vouchers that provide opportunities for them to obtain housing. There are service provisions where they have case managers that can find dollars for them, money for them, either through the federal system or through private funding. That allows them to seek services, whether it's job training or otherwise. And so from that perspective, you know, the reality of where we are in homelessness is, as I said, of the 50-some-odd thousand homeless people that we have, and the reason I say some odd is because we know there's been a recent count that we think somewhat overestimated it because it counted what I'll call hidden homeless. But if you look at the people that you would think of homeless, the people that are living on the street or in nightly shelters, there's, you know, around 50,000 of those people. Our taxpayer dollars, the amount of taxpayer dollars that we spend on it is about $875 million a year that are going to service those 50,000 people. Of that, $650 million are spent on the chronically homeless alone. Those are people that have been on the streets just for more than a year. So you have 75% of the resources going to about 23% of the population. And what we found was that if you just realign those resources, look at them more efficiently, and you put a chronically homeless person into a home, their cost to the system immediately goes down by 40%. And that savings then can be given to the homeless family, to children's programs or the like. And so that's really what we're doing, is trying to create those system changes that allows that alignment, allows that efficiency to take place.
Okay, and historically, how have city leaders and the government handled the homeless issue? Have we just forgotten about them? Have we been pushing them out more?
In Los Angeles?
Yes.
Historically, part of the issue was, and I think there's been huge changes in it and a lot of advances made, but it was set up as kind of a somewhat of a fatalistic system, in the sense that all of the dollars that go to building kind of the bricks and mortars, the places where people live, were held in the hands of the cities. And all of the service dollars that would go to help people who are homeless, to service them, to provide them, you know, whether it be the clinics or kind of the mental health services or the drug rehab services or whatever it be, were held in the hands of the county. And there was a historic kind of rift between the city of Los Angeles, at least in the county, and many of the other cities in the county, where the two would not work together. And from that perspective, that created kind of a dysfunction in the system that allowed a lot of the homeless people to fall through the cracks, not in that they weren't getting service, but the services that they were getting were either varied or just not efficiently provided, where it was you know, comprehensive in how you evaluated and cared for a person. Each one was kind of being ping-ponged around through a maze of opportunistic providers who would service them at will. What we've done is we've realigned that, and now the county and the cities are really communicating. They're working well together. They're looking at the problem holistically. We've created a system called the Coordinated Entry System, where you actually have an alignment where we recognize who are the people who are homeless, who are the most vulnerable of those people, who's the most likely person to die on the street tonight, and you have an indice of that, and you have what are their needs, and then on the other hand you have what are the housing opportunities that are available, and how do those housing opportunities provide for the various needs. And then you start aligning the two, and you make sure that you set priorities to those people who are most vulnerable as you go down the list, as opposed to doing it haphazard, which is what used to be done, where we would just, if someone was homeless for a day but got in line first, they would get the housing opportunity before a person who may have been homeless for 10 years. And so by realigning the system and having that coordination between the county and the cities, we've really changed the way that homeless people are both treated and the opportunities for them to get help and to really find housing.
Okay, and this last question is for you, Bob. How do you think that government and developers and just different groups can work together to help solve and strategize development to help homeless people?
Well, I think a couple of the things that were referred to here, I think, you know, homelessness, I think in LA County, it's been realized that homelessness is a regional problem. It's not just a downtown LA problem, it's not a Venice Beach problem or a Santa Monica problem, because when, say, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, when cities and different municipalities were addressing these issues somewhat on their own, I would say, you know, there was a discoordination and a really lack of using the available funds efficiently for really what is, it's a regional problem, and homeless people aren't totally inert. I mean, they do move from area to area, and so if you're just looking at solving your downtown LA problem, you know, then maybe you push most people out of downtown LA, but then they go to Venice or they go to Santa Monica. So it's a problem that has to be dealt with holistically. You can't, you know, push people aside and think they're going to go away, because they don't go away. You know, they're part of our society, and they're us. And so it's something we need to look at holistically and continue the same kind of, you know, coordinated efforts among the city and with the leadership from the county to address these problems.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you both for joining me today. It's all the time we have today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Now back to you, Jamie.
We would all like to thank you for watching On Point. If you would like to see more, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter by searching CSUN On Point, all one word. The show also appears on our website, CSUNTVnews.com, or catch us on LA Channel 36 every Sunday morning at 11:30. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Jamie Gonzaga. Thank you for watching.